How do attackers really steal tokens in Entra ID, and what can defenders actually do about it? Today, I'm joined by Dr. Azure AD himself, Nestori Syynimaa. We're going to break all that stuff down. We're going to dive into token security, the evolution of AAD internals, his PowerShell module, and also his journey from CIO to principal identity security researcher at Microsoft. So let's get into it. So when you started developing AAD internals and really getting into Azure AD security, what was the biggest surprise to you as someone from that perspective outside of Microsoft, and you're peering into AD and understanding how it really works?
Biggest surprise? That's a very good question, and probably it's going to be a very long answer, but let's try to keep it minimum. Well, I have a programming background. I've been in this industry, in IT for 25 years now. So I started in 2000. I started as a software developer, and then I went to CTO, CIO, and that kind of stuff. Then I went to training. So I went back to do the technical training, and during that time, I learned about Azure AD first time. And then I was doing the training, and I realized that there's something weird going on here. So can it really be like this? And what about if I change it somehow differently? And I tried to do that. It took hours to configure ADFS server to try to do things. And then I thought that maybe there's some easier way. So I implemented that as a PowerShell script, and I did that. And I noticed that, okay, well, maybe somebody else would also like to use this. So I created a module about that. I put it in, what's that called? PowerShell gallery. And then I just start reading about that. And then now and then when I was speaking conferences, I mentioned the tool and so on. And I noticed that people are actually using that. And then at some point I got somebody contacted me from Microsoft and said, hey, did you know that there are threat actors actually using your tool? And I said, no, not really. Yeah. So that was maybe the biggest surprise, that I don't have a company or anything who does marketing, for instance. So people just found my tool and started using that. Both sides, if you will. So the good guys and the bad guys. That's cool,
because you see a lot of it in when you look at like incident response and things. A lot of the tools that they're using, they're just sysadmin tools, right? Like on-prem, you see things like they'll be using like AD reconnaissance tools and all that kind of stuff. And I guess the things that you develop to help an IT manager or an identity manager, all that kind of stuff, the bad guys can just kind of hook on the back of that and learn about AAD as well, I guess. That's the idea.
Yeah, that's correct.
And so when you made the move from being CIO, I don't want to belittle it here, but I guess security researcher as a kind of hobbyist, and you moved into full-time security research.
Yeah.
How did you make that transition, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, okay. So before I joined like a cybersecurity as a business, I started to work like as a full-time in cybersecurity. As you mentioned, I was a CIO, and I was CIO of 8 cities surrounding my hometown Tampere, which is the second city of Finland. And I also worked together with, let's put it this way. The whole 9 cities, including my hometown, they share the infrastructure, including like a cloud. And I was doing that as a hobby, as you mentioned. So I did the job. I allowed 8 hours a day, then came home and then continued my research on security, and did that for 4 or 8 hours a day. But that's not very sustainable. Working like 20 or 6 or 20 hours a day. So I think it was 2020, December, when I got an MVP. And then I was like, okay, maybe there is something that I could, maybe I could do this as a living. And then I contacted some organization to see if there's any position available. And then I was actually contacted by a company called SecureWorks, and they asked that, would you like to work for us? And they made an offer that I couldn't resist, and that's how it happened.
That's cool. So you got the offer you can't refuse kind of deal. That's very cool. And so SecureWorks, they've just, or I think they're currently going through the process of being acquired by Sophos, right? And so when you do security research for a company like that, and I guess now you're doing it for Microsoft, right? Is it as good as it sounds? I guess is where I'm going here. Do you just get like 8 hours a day to play about and poke at things and figure out what's going wrong? What does that look like in terms of day-to-day life?
Yeah, well, that is how it sounds. So back then I tried to probe Microsoft things, and the idea here is, or what is the like a business, or what's the catch here? So why I was able to do that is that SecureWorks had a XDR tool called Taegis, very hard to pronounce to me. But anyways, so the idea was that there was a couple of researchers in a team, and we tried to find like vulnerabilities from Microsoft products, and then of course report them to Microsoft and fight them before the bad guys do. And then build detections. And when we had a customer data, we could see the telemetry that has some organization been attacked using that attack part of vulnerability earlier. So that was like the idea. And now I'm doing pretty much the same, but I just inside Microsoft.
That's kind of cool. So I guess it's like, for example, the benefit if you're a SecureWorks customer, and just using that as an example, is in theory you get the detections ahead of maybe other XDR platforms and all that kind of stuff. And so now that you're doing it for Microsoft, the question that comes to mind for me is, how has your relationship with AAD internals changed, right? Because I'm like, if I'm thinking out loud here, do you have to tame in some of the stuff that you would potentially add to this because of the potential repercussions of red teamers and all the rest of it? What does that look like?
Yeah, so first of all, why I joined Microsoft, so let's talk about that first, is that I have a bigger impact, if you will. When I was outsider, I was researching stuff, so it was like black box research. So I put something in and something came out, and then I just had to analyze or guess what happened inside. Now I can open the box and see what's inside there. And hopefully I can find something before we ship something out. So that's even better. So I think that's shifting detection to as early as possible. So is the term shifting something to left? Maybe that's the correct one. But anyways, then about AAD internals. So before I joined Microsoft, so I kind of like, I understood that I can publish like offensive tool in a way that I used to. And then I talked with my manager and his manager, and they were like, well, why not? Because we have like these internals, which which is programmed by Azure technical, whatever he is nowadays.
Yeah, I think CTO, isn't he? Yeah. Azure. Yeah.
So that it is possible. Of course, I can't. Well, I never hadn't published any 0 days as such. But now I don't do anything even close to that nowadays. I update the tool, fix the bugs, and if somebody is like publishing something new, like other people, that is maybe like by design stuff or something like that, I can then add that to the tool. And anything that is in the tool, I just need to make sure that we can detect that if there's something new. Yes, so it's a little bit different.
I got you. That's cool. So the question also becomes, how do Microsoft detect the use of AAD internals by threat actors in Entra tenants? That's part of the kind of the scope of the research you're involved in at the minute as well. Right, understood. That makes sense. Because I know that if I try to run AAD internals on my device that's got Defender for Endpoint on it, it lights up like a Christmas tree. It really doesn't like when you kick that off.
Yeah, well, actually, that was a good example. So the latest version doesn't do that anymore. So it doesn't light like a Christmas tree. And the reason why it did lit up like a Christmas tree was that there was a certain like functionality that could harm your endpoint if it would be like ADF server or PTA agent and so on. But there were also like cloud stuff that people just want to test their cloud environment or do some admin stuff. And that part was also blocked by MDE. So I actually split the module. So now I have a normal AAD internals that doesn't do anything on your endpoints. And then there's a AAD internals for endpoints that is doing that stuff. And it still lights up like a Christmas tree. Well, not the installation part anymore, but if you try to use some functionality, it will get like a blocked or detected immediately.
Gotcha. That's cool. And so on that point then of the things that kind of maybe sit outside the scope of touching the endpoints, one of the other cool things you run on your website is the OSINT page, right? Where, for example, someone can punch in a domain name and they get really quite interesting information about what does that tenant look like. And it can be surprising to folks who've never seen this before, just how much is publicly available that you can just query about an Entra tenant.
Yes.
And so where that kind of leads me in my train of thought is Entra by its nature is a directory. And there's a lot of stuff that's public and isn't as hidden as folks think about. What are the main things that stand out to you as, what would you say, things that are public but maybe shouldn't be? Is there any risk, for example, to the things that the OSINT tool can reveal? Or is this all stuff that if you're doing security right, shouldn't be too much of a concern anyway?
Yeah, one of the reasons, well, the main reason why I created that tool is that there is information available regardless, do you know about that or not? So now we have a tool that you can type in your own, let's say, email domain, and you can see what information is available. And one of the things is that, for instance, if you are a company, you are acquiring another company, you may register the domain name to your tenant, and that is public information that people don't necessarily understand. So if you want to hide that you are going to acquire a company or maybe register a new like product or something. Don't register the domain to your tenant until you are ready to do that publicly. So that's one of the things that came to my mind.
That's a good one. I would have never thought of that, but it makes total sense, right? It's a good point. It makes me want to go away and check the domains that we've got registered in our tenant. Yeah, I'll check that one offline. Maybe amend it before this goes live.
Yeah, the other thing is that what authentication methods you use, that's also like public information. So that is like, so for instance, if you have federated domains, so like ADFS or Okta or Ping or whatever you're using, threat actors, well, or anybody can see that. So that they say, okay, that is federated, okay, there's an ADFS server, maybe I should attack that instead of like users or phishing users, something like that. So that's also that it's like
that's a good point. One of the ones, I'm going off of memory here, am I right that it also tells you if you've got seamless single sign-on enabled? I mean,
correct.
Yes. What's the reason for that one, right? Because I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, why would that need to be publicly available? Why does that matter until I sign in?
Well, the seamless single sign-on, so how it works and what it's meant for is that it was before like Entra ID or Azure AD joint devices. So it was like single sign-on for domain joint computers. And that is based on Kerberos. And those who know how Kerberos works, so you need to register service principal name and so on and so on. And that is actually Entra ID. So when you are logging to your computer, it kind of like automatically signs into cloud. Now, when you are like doing that, so you try to log into Entra ID and you type in your username, then Entra ID needs to know that are you like using that single sign-on or not. And if you are, they can then like redirect you to a certain place, and then that happens like automatically. So I think that's the reason for that.
Gotcha, makes sense. And I'm kind of glad that came up, because it's one of those things that's there by, if you go away and you configure Entra Connect just now, it's there as a tick box in the wizard, right? And a lot of folks will go away and enable it. But to your point, I guess it's a little bit of a legacy feature now, right?
You don't use that. Yeah, for sure.
It should say that in the wizard. Maybe it does now. I don't know, but it should say that in the wizard.
I don't know, because you don't need that to anything if you have like Entra ID joint devices, which you usually have, or Entra ID registered, so you just don't need that anymore. And that's also like one of the ways to create a backdoor. So if you're able to compromise on-prem AD, you can get the password of that service principal, and then you can create your own Kerberos tickets and you can get into cloud, especially if you don't have like MFA or some conditional access policies that are blocking that.
So I guess if I got like Windows 11 devices only and they're all Entra joined or even hybrid Entra joined, I could just blast that computer object away, right? And get rid of that. Cool. That makes sense. And it does bring me nicely onto the other, I guess, hot topic at the minute, right? Which is just token theft and everything to do with securing tokens, because it is the kind of, it's becoming like the currency of identity compromise these days. When you could spend like 15 hours talking about all the different types of tokens and implications in Entra, what are the key things that folks need to know, right? If I have no idea about what on earth this token is in Entra, what's the too long didn't read version?
Yeah, well, I actually have talked about that about 10 hours during the past year, because I had like 10 presentations or conference talks about that. Okay, so what is a token? So it represents some information that who you are. And let's say this is a token, okay? So it's a badge that you go to the conference door and you show your IDs and whatever. You need to, so maybe an email or QR code or something, and then you will receive a badge, and that's the token. So now that proves who you are. So when you're going to the conference, they check this on the door, and then you can just come in. Right. Now, this is a bearer token. So what if somebody steals this? So we have made it quite difficult for people to get those access tokens by, introducing things like conditional access or MFA. So that's quite difficult nowadays. So it's much easier, instead of stealing your passport, it's just steal this one. So if somebody goes, walks by, you can just take it and maybe copy that and then just give it back, and then you can be that person. So that's kind of like analogy for the token theft. And basically what we have witnessed that there are two kinds of way how you can steal the tokens. And the first one is phishing. So phishing just means that you are going to give some information about yourself, like username and password maybe. Threat actors may use things like evil things, if you know that that tool, you are lured to click a link that takes to the page that looks like Entra ID login page. You give in your user and password and maybe do the MFA, and then that proxy thing will steal your token. And now they have your token. And another thing is that what we have witnessed quite often is that if somebody is compromising your endpoint, install some malware there. And then when you are logging in normally using your computer, they can steal that from your computer. So that's another technique that we have seen that threat actors have used to, steal this token.
So on that point, I guess you've got a couple of the key ways in that the adversary gets the tokens. Number one, they get them at the time of issuance through adversary in the middle, where, hey, Intra's just issued you the token, and as you get that token, I'm going to take it too. And then you've got the other one to contend with, which is post-issuance, where you've already had the token, it's sitting on your endpoint, and there's some kind of malware or compromised Chrome extension or something that then just steals that after the fact. Now, when you think about those, the way to defend against that, that's what kind of keeps me up at night, right? Especially when I think of things like less to do with preventing the problem of tokens being stolen by adversary in the middle, because we know the defense against that, right? It's phish-resistant authentication, passkeys, and all that kind of stuff. But what scares me is the post-issuance theft of tokens, right? It's info-stealer malware running on the OS. It's a Chrome extension that just is malicious or being compromised or something like that. And I guess the question that kind of follows on for me is, what are the latest recommendations / trends or maybe even developments coming out of Microsoft to protect against that type of token theft?
Well, that's actually quite easy. And this is an opinion that not everybody shares with me. But from security point of view, you just can't let people use their own devices. So bring your own devices. That's like a ban. Don't do that. And the reason for that is that if you allow users to use devices that you don't manage in any way, you can't see what's inside. So you don't know what's inside that. So they may be malware and so on. So that's the only way. And if we use analogy, so for instance, if we require using like managed devices, so this lanyard could be an example. So we have defined that you can get access token only if you have lanyard like this. But what if I want to use thing like that? This is much easier to wear. Yeah, but that's not safe enough. So you can easily just pull it off. And if you want to take this, it takes like 5 minutes, even though if you have time to do that. So that's like an analogy that your organization defines which is safe, like equipment to use, and you need to use that. If you want to use your own, then you can't access our services. So it's as simple as that.
That's really good insight. One of the things that does come to mind is, I totally agree with you as far as just don't allow BYOD, right? Because the risk is so massive. There's things you can do again to mitigate it, right? But when it comes to having that discussion with some organizations, that's a tough pill to swallow, right? Because I guess the message over the last, I don't know, probably more than 15 years now has been, hey, BYOD is fine, right? You know what I mean? You can go away and use this. But I know you look at things like, is it the Microsoft Digital Defense Report? And the numbers are kind of crazy. It says something like over 90% of identity-based compromises start from unmanaged devices and things like that, right? Which is just a wild statistic to me, but I'm sure that's what it says. Is there any kind of compromise to be made? Is there any way to do BYOD securely? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, the mobile devices are a little bit different than laptops because you have like the corporate side here, which you can let your employer to manage. Even though it's your device, you can let them manage that part, and you can only access company assets using that part of I think it's called work profile, something like that. So that's the one thing. And the second thing is that, well, it's always like, what is your risk appetite and what you can do, or what kind of risk you can accept. So for instance, you can say that, okay, you can access email, but nothing else. So no line of business applications. So you can do conditional access policies that prevents that. Of course, that's the main thing. And of course, you can use data loss prevention, that kind of stuff. You can encrypt your documents. So if somebody can get access to that device, but not access to the identity of the user, they can access those files.
It's a good point. And one of the things that I've kind of known all along, but really just was slammed in my face the other day as a reminder, was that you can use Defender for Cloud apps to get that kind of reverse proxy capability, right? And it will block downloads on BYOD devices. So it basically says, hey, conditional access, hand over to the Defender for Cloud Apps Reverse Proxy. But the problem there is that it still hands over the authorization token, and you can grab that and use it elsewhere to get access to the API permissions that it might hand over.
Yeah.
Now, that got me thinking insofar as, okay, so that means that maybe useful for some use cases, but it wouldn't stop a particularly determined adversary. In terms of the mobile side of defense, when I think about BYOD, in my head, I'm thinking we got Windows BYOD, we got macOS BYOD, and then we get iOS BYOD. And I'm like, you're the expert, so let me know what you think here. But my gut instinct is telling me that my tokens and things feel a lot safer when they're on my iPhone than they do when they're just sitting on my BYOD Windows device, right? And a few things come to mind there, like Secure Enclave and the fact that the App Store is kind of audited and allow listed and things like that. You really get into the minefield then of different types of token being issued on different types of devices, right? So where I'm heading with this is Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. They're all getting different types of token, right? What's the reason for that? Like, why isn't there just one type of token and every device is get the exact same thing? Why do they all handle it in different methods?
Well, I guess the tokens are pretty much the same, I would say. But how would I put this? So each of those are or can be safe, and they can be like unsafe. It depends. I think like Android, I don't remember what is that called, Knox, I think.
Sure.
And then and the similar technology in iPhone. So they are safe by default, but how you configure your PCs or Macs, it depends. And if you think about token theft, so I wouldn't allow people to use any device that we can't really manage, that we can make them safe. So actually, I don't know what is the current situation with Intune and Mac, for instance, but you should have some mobile device management or similar thing that allows you to make them safe. And if they are configured safe and you can verify that, then it's okay to use those. But if you compare like a PC that let's say your wife has bought from I don't know what kind of like stores are in the UK, but where you buy it, like Best Buy-ish. So if you go there and buy like a cheapest laptop there are without TPM running Windows 10, for instance, so I don't consider that to be safe. But if you go and buy the latest like business Android or iPhone, they are safe. I don't know, did I answer your question because you asked about different kind of tokens, but I think the tokens are pretty much the same in those devices.
I get you. So the token itself is the same. What matters is the hardware and the OS and how they can protect it, I guess is what you're saying. Because you touched on something there when you mentioned TPM, right? So if I've got Windows 11, I get TPM2 dedicated or built into the CPU. Sounds like that's going to give me higher levels of protection if I don't. That's the idea.
Yeah, especially like there's a certain kind of token called a primary reference token, or PRT, which is bound to the device. What it means is that it is bound to keys that are stored in the device. And if you have TPM, they are stored or at least decrypted with TPM, so you can access those. You can only ask TPM that, please, can you do something with can you sign this token using that key? But you can steal those keys. If you don't have TPM, you can steal those keys and get them off the device, and then you can pretend to be that device and you. So that protects against that. And again, if you are using managed devices, you require to have TPM, you are safe. But if you don't have TPM, it's a very bad thing, then you are not that safe. So there's a difference, like if you compromise user's computer and you can ask the TPM to sign token request for you, that's a bad thing. But it's much worse that if you can get those off the device and then do that offline. So that's the worst case scenario, I would say.
And is stuff like that just available out the box, right? So for example, if I have Windows 11 and I got my TPM up running, then that's all good. There's no specific configuration for that over on the Entra side of the fence, right? It just deals with all that kind of stuff. It's automatically, right? Cool.
Just turn the device and Windows takes care of the rest.
Right. Cool. That makes a lot of sense. One of the other things that has received a little bit of news recently is, I'm going to butcher the name of this. You'll know more than me. There's a kind of concept within the 365 side of things within Entra, something to do with like family of related apps or something like that, right? And that became kind of more well known recently because of a quote unquote bypass around device compliance and the requirement for that, right? Could you maybe share a little bit more about what is that? Why do some apps from the 365 side of the fence receive more API permissions than you might intuitively expect?
That's a very good question. And I think you are referring to that Intune client ID.
Yes, so it was the company portal app received API permissions that you wouldn't really expect it to receive.
Yeah, so let's talk about this first. So short introduction, how cloud works. So you go to Entra ID and you say that, okay, this is me. I'm using this client ID and I want to access that resource. And here's my proof of identity. And as a return, you will get access token that says, okay, you have this level access with this token to that resource. And now we are talking about Intune application ID or something like that. Can't remember the exact name. So you went to Entra ID and said, okay, I'm using this client ID. I want to access Azure AD Graph, which is going to be deprecated quite soon. And this is my proof of identity. And what you got back was an access token that has user impersonation scope to Azure AD Graph, which means that if you have that access token, you can do anything you have access or you have permissions to do in Entra using Azure AD Graph. And the bad thing here was that there was an exception that allowed, even though that you have conditional access policy that says that you need to have like a managed or compliant device, if you use that client ID, those rules were not applied. So that gave like quite extensive permissions to API that you shouldn't have. But that's now fixed like last week or so. So now you only have like a read permission to certain things. So even though that you would be able to compromise global admin permissions or credentials, and you access that endpoint with that token, you really can't do anything but just read a couple of things. And why was that? So that was just like a bug or bad design, if you will. So those exceptions are not.
Yep. And for what it's worth, it did get fixed really quite quick, right? And it wasn't, I know, like when I tested it on my conditional access configured Entra, it didn't work for me. And it was all to do with basically the way that you had set up your policy, where if you chose grant require conditional access, it would work for that. So the tool that was released was Tokensmith, and it would bypass that. What it would not bypass was if you used device filters and you said does not equal compliant. So again, it was all to do with how you basically had your Entra configured as well. And so one of the things I have to contend with day to day is figuring out, well, what's the proper way to research and stay on top of everything to do with Entra and I guess 365 on the whole. I know, obviously I'm not a full-time security researcher, and any research I do is, I guess you would say, it's like second-hand research. I'm just figuring out what other researchers have found out and are sharing. For folks who are maybe watching and listening to this who are interested maybe in Entra security or maybe just cybersecurity in general and want to get into that research area, is there a specific mindset or attitude that's required of it? And I'll tell you what, one of the reasons that question comes to mind for me is your title, right? You're Dr. Azure AD, and that doctor part is legit, right? You're a legit doctor, so you've got that background in research and things like that. So what's your general advice to folks out there with those kind of aspirations?
Yeah, so it depends what you want to do. Like you said that you are following what others are doing. So that's doing the research that you can do your job well, so you know what is going on. And for that, you just need to follow guys in Twitter or X or whatever that called, or in Blue Sky nowadays maybe, or in LinkedIn. So go see who is following and follow them. So that's a very nice way to, get into that. If you want to get your hands dirty and, get a big bounty from our bounty programs and so on. So then you need to do your own hardcore research. And what helped me was that there are certain people who are writing nice write-ups. So if they find something, they write step-by-step things of how they did find something. And I also adopted that thing. So when I did the research and I found something interesting, I wrote down how I ended up to find a solution. And even those, when things didn't go that well, I had to pause for a month or something. So I also wrote those. And other people are doing that, like Dirkian Mulema, for instance, him well, and he is writing that kind of write-ups. So reading those helps.
And so I guess it's a combination of figuring out what other folks are doing and basically
how they are doing that.
How they're doing it.
Yeah.
Right. I got you. What are the tools they're using? How can I use those tools to further the research? That kind of approach.
Correct. And you also learn how things work in general. And if you use others' tools, always read the source code, how they did that. People are, well, at least I am commenting that why I did this because there's some weird thing and there's a link to other resources and so on. So yeah, so follow others, see what they are doing and how they did that. So that's like you are learning that some basics how things go. And of course, there are a lot of like CTFs, so capture the flag, like competitions and hack the box and that kind of companies where you can buy access and they have challenges and then you can try to hack in those boxes. And quite quickly you find a method that, okay, this is how things are, probably go and so on.
Right. Gotcha. I think that's really, really, really sound advice. We should wrap up this show. And one final question I got that comes to mind for me is you look back at your career, you look back into, I guess, your previous life in that CIO role and things like that. And you mentioned you became an MVP in 2020. We're having this discussion in 2025. What would be, if you could go back in time, let's say 6, 7, 8 years ago, what would be maybe a piece of advice you would give your old self in retrospect?
Well, I wouldn't change anything. Let's put it this way. Maybe say that it would have helped a lot if I would like read about other researchers earlier. So maybe that was the case. And there were things like conferences like Black Hat or DEFCON. I didn't know about those at all. But then when I was there, there's an area in Black Hat which is called Arsenal, where you can show your tool demos. So I was there in 2019 maybe. And then I realized how big this scene is actually. So it's very big. And if I would have known that earlier, I would be in the conferences earlier because there you can meet people who are like-minded. You can talk to people who have made tools that you are using. They have find some nice things and there are people even running companies that you can read from the news and you can just talk to people who work there. So be the part of the community, let's say. That's a good way to start. Like you are running your own security related like user group once a month or twice a month or something like that. So that's also like good to go in that kind of like user groups virtually or in person and you can meet people and then you know other people who are attending, follow them, talk to them and so on. So that's maybe the advice I would say to younger me, not young me because I'm old guy.
Good advice. I totally agree with you insofar as I look back 5 years ago in my career and basically every advance I've been able to make in my career, the root cause of it is probably just doing more community stuff, right? It's talking to people, learning from them, doing events, all that kind of stuff. So listen, I've found this really, really useful. I've learned a ton of stuff. If folks want to find you online and network with you, like you just kind of suggested, where's the right place to do that?
Well, I'm still in the Twitter or X or whatever that's called nowadays, and I go by the tag Dr Nestori, and also in Blue Sky. I'm in LinkedIn. On LinkedIn and you can go to aadinternals.com. So there's my blog posts, that OSINT tool we were talking about earlier. And I think that's it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, listen, appreciate your time. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.